Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing our series on Aristotle's Poetics, looking at why Plato hates poets. Now, in order to understand some of Aristotle's motivations for writing the Poetics, we need to see who he is responding to. His teacher, Plato. While Aristotle thought there was a time and a place for the poet in society, Plato disagreed. To be clear, by poet, Plato and Aristotle mean authors of fiction in general. So this is everything from your novelist to your film writer. That included for them both epic poetry and theatrical performances. Plato broadly had two main issues with poetry. First, he viewed it as a type of rhetoric or sophistry. Basically, it's problematic as it convinces people for the wrong reasons. A play persuades you using emotion, not logical argument. Additionally, poets do not study truth. They study ways to convince people of something. This is problematic as it means they are convincing others of what they think is true without studying the truth themselves. And they're doing it quite persuasively because they've studied the way to convince someone of something, not the way to find what is actually the case or what is true. For Plato, literature is nothing more than propaganda made by those who study the art of persuasion, not the art of truth or virtue. Now, this isn't Plato's only qualm with the world of the arts. For Plato, he's not just concerned with the methods of the poet, but with the content of the poems as well. Literature tells stories about individuals, anecdotes about concrete particulars of life. For Plato, this is the wrong direction to go, metaphysically, in order to find truth. Plato believed that truth about the world could be found in abstracting individual particulars up to pure forms that life is a mere imitation of. Think Plato's The Cave. Basically, all we're seeing in the real world are shadows of these pure forms, and by seeing enough shadows, we can intellectually abstract to what those forms must actually be. But that imitation, that just seeing the shadows of an image, necessarily distorts the purity of that good image. Think of a triangle. We see imperfect instances of triangles in the world, but there's some pure form of triangle out there that's a perfect triangle that follows the laws of mathematics perfectly. Stories, on the other hand, move in the wrong direction. They don't go towards abstracting to a pure truth about reality. Rather, they take something that's already an imitation of the pure forms and make another imitation of that. That moves in the wrong direction and is a copy of a copy. So basically, Plato thought that life was already a poor imitation of the real, universal, abstract forms. In order to gain truth, one must abstract from the individual, imperfect objects that we observe to the universal forms that they are a reflection of. This imitation of the true forms necessarily distorts the truth, and therefore leads us further away from that truth. Literature and theater are themselves an imitation of life, and if life is a bad imitation of the forms, therefore theater is an imitation of an imitation, leading us further away from truth, not closer to it. And it's important to note that Plato and Socrates may have had something of a personal vendetta against the theater, given Aristophanes' play The Clouds, which openly mocked Socrates and Plato, and according to Plato was one factor that led to Socrates' trial and eventual execution, despite some of Aristophanes' sympathies to some of Plato's ideas about the dangers of imitation. This is said to be a potential issue, but given the lack of kind of solid documents about these classical times, it's unclear exactly how much this played a factor in Plato's concern about the theater. Aristotle, ever the rebellious student, came to the aid of the theater, arguing that it did in fact have a place in gaining truth and living a good life. In the next video in this series, we will look at Aristotle's defense of the theater, which frames his Poetics. So, stay tuned for Aristotle's case for poetry. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.